This episode of The Startup Life is brought to you by People Ready. Startup Nation, you have a lot on your plate. The last thing you need to stress about is finding quality staff or the available work you need to be successful. Save time and headache by working with a trusted staffing partner that meets your everyday needs. People Ready is a national staffing provider with over 600 locations across the country and 30 plus years of experience serving people just like you. They specialize in a variety of industries including retail, manufacturing, logistics, general cleaning, hospitality, construction, and more. People Ready understands that you're busy and on the go. That's where their mobile app, JobStack, comes in. Use the app to place orders or find work 24/7 or wherever you are. And as social distancing continues to change the way we interact with customers, colleagues, and our everyday lives, JobStack provides the ability to find the right temporary workers or work you need while eliminating the amount of physical touch points needed in the staffing process. Visit peopleready.com/startup life to learn more about how you can partner with People Ready.
It's time to be about that life, the startup life. Here's your host, Dominic Lawson.
All right, Startup Nation, so I hope you're ready to receive some value today. My name is Dominic Lawson, and this is The Startup Life, the show for entrepreneurs and career-minded professionals. You know, Startup Nation, in this golden era or this era of entrepreneurship, we always hear about grow, scale it fast, this, that, and the other. But a lot of times what comes with that is a lot of bureaucracy. And if you listen to this show long enough, you know how much that can be a headache. But today's guest is going to help us out with that. He is a professor of the London Business School and the co-founder of the Management Lab. He has written 20 articles for the Harvard Business Review and is named by the Wall Street Journal as the world's most influential business thinker. His most recent bestsellers are The Future of Management and What Matters Now, as he's here on The Startup Life to talk about his latest book, Humanocracy, Creating Organizations as Amazing as the People Inside Them. He is Gary Hamel. Professor G, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, and I'm so pleased to have a chance to chat with you and your esteemed listeners.
No worries. So I guess that means you're ready to pour some knowledge in the Startup Nation, so we're definitely appreciate your time. But before we kind of dive into your book and everything, just kind of share with us a little bit of your background, kind of share your origin story, if you don't mind, sir.
Well, I grew up in Michigan, went to the University of Michigan, got my MBA, spent a little bit of time working as a hospital administrator and decided I didn't want to be going to the same committee meetings every week and every month. So went back and got a PhD. This will age me. That was in the late 1970s. And certainly one of the kind of career moments for me was watching the U.S. auto industry get hammered at that time by the new Japanese competitors, and that really hadn't happened to U.S. companies before.
Right.
And what really hit me, Dominic, was just the human consequences of companies that make bad decisions, companies that get caught behind the curve, companies that are slow to recognize the future and respond. Because I watched neighbors lose jobs, I watched a city get hollowed out, and that took this idea of business from kind of an intellectual thing for me to a very deep personal thing.
I hear that.
And that's stuck with me ever since.
I imagine even with the latest everything is going on as far as like our economic recession, if you will, that kind of hits a little home for you as well, huh?
Well, and just the more general challenges you see right now. I mean, as you and all your listeners would know, over the last few years, kind of the establishment has taken a bit of a beating.
Right.
And, young people who are eager and ready to give socialism another chance. You have the kind of the drain the swamp voters. You have in Britain, all the people who voted for Brexit, the yellow vest protesters in France. And literally, it doesn't matter which spectrum you're on. A survey just run last month, only 29% of Americans said capitalism works for the average person. And so, we're at a point in time where that fundamental promise of kind of democratic capitalism, that with hard work and so on, you can improve your situation life. A lot of people find that promise pretty hollow right now. And obviously, every human being is searching for dignity and for opportunity and equity. And our data, and we'll talk about this, is that for many people that is hard to find at work. It may be hard to find in their personal lives for other reasons. But if you don't find that sense of dignity and equity and opportunity at work, it's probably going to be hard to make that up anywhere else. So, yeah, we're at a point in time where we're asking some pretty fundamental questions about how our society is organized and who does it really work for and how do you get ahead. And we're writing the book very mindful of that context. I'm happy to dive in and talk about it if you like.
For sure. So let's dive into that. And once again, Startup Nation, the book is Humanocracy, Creating Organizations as Amazing as the People Inside Them. So just kind of talk about a little bit why you wanted to buy the book, just a little bit deeper, why you wanted to write this book at this day and time, because it seems very relevant right now.
Well, let's take a little day to start there.
Sure.
I mean, here's what really got me thinking about all of this and recognizing that we need to do better. So Gallup's data says that only about 17% of employees are intellectually and emotionally engaged in their work. And that means the vast majority of the workforce is showing up physically, but they're really not there with their imagination, their initiative, their passion, and they're kind of going through the motions. And by the way, that is not their fault, but most of them work in companies that really don't get the best out of them, don't elicit, don't even, you might argue, deserve the best of them. We know, for example, that only 1 in 5 employees believes their ideas matter at work. Only 1 in 10 say they have the freedom to experiment and try new things at work. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says that fully 70% of all U.S. jobs require little or no originality. And that doesn't say anything about the people in those jobs. In fact, I think we make an enormous mistake when we kind of label a job as low skilled. I don't believe there's any job that's low skilled, but I think there are a lot of jobs that are low opportunity because those bureaucratic kind of top down power structures, this kind of caste system you find in so many organizations that distinguishes between kind of quotes managers and employees, the thinkers and the doers. It really makes it hard for many, many people to grow their skills, grow their talent, to solve new problems, to maximize their contribution. And so it seemed to me this was something we needed to fix, that where we had so many organizations that have been built to maximize control, and that was the goal of bureaucracy. We need to shift this, and we need organizations that are built to maximize human contribution. And that was going to require really a sea change in how we think about leadership, organization, and management. And that's what we set out to launch with this new book.
For sure. And I'm glad you said that, because in my show prep, I came across some content where you was talking to BBC Global Business, and you kind of talked about how, there's no correlation between, profit and size of organizations, and that CEOs have this imperialistic instinct that, in order to make a lot of money, you have to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And I imagine that's kind of counterintuitive to a stakeholders model of cultivating talent within the organization, cultivating innovation within the organization. Kind of talk about that if you don't mind, sir.
Yeah, well, certainly, if you look over the last few years and decades, what all of your listeners would see is that often the incumbents have been really slow to catch on to what's changing. Right. That's why we often today, I live in the middle of Silicon Valley, and they just kind of expect the old guard to lose. They expect it will be, the newcomers, whatever those companies may be, to win. And I think what we're realizing is in today's world, resources count for much less than resourcefulness. Right? It doesn't matter how big you are. It matters how fast you can innovate, how fast you can pivot, do something new. And the real advantage of a startup, and I've started several companies. I see them up close all the time where I live. The real advantage of a startup usually isn't that it has some completely unique business model. Often those ideas have been tried before, but what's unique is they have organizations that are flat, fast, open, lean, meritocratic, and pretty much just the opposite of what you find in big bureaucracies. So yeah, I think a lot of CEOs still believe, the goal is to get bigger, and that often means buying one of my competitors and trying to get more market power, build a monopolistic advantage. But that's a losing play in a world of hyperkinetic change. Whatever size you are, the most important question is, do you have an organization that can change as fast as the world around you, and one that can outrun change itself? And size is often a detriment in that.
I want to ask you this, Gary, if you don't mind, because, we're having this debate that's going back and forth about the value of essential workers in businesses, right? So kind of talk about that, if you don't mind, as it relates to your book.
Well, again, there's a kind of prejudice, I think, that exists in a lot of organizations where the assumption is that people on the front lines who we have come to rely on so heavily now, and I think we have a newfound appreciation for a lot of those frontline workers, but on average, we kind of treat them as if they're, kind of semi-programmable robots or almost invisible in our organizations. And that's why you see that kind of engagement data. And what's interesting is, if you look at the data, most people enjoy their work. When I first saw that data that said, well, only 17% of people are truly engaged in their work, I thought, well, that's understandable because there's a lot of jobs out there that aren't very engaging. And every day we see people doing jobs we're probably glad we don't have to do. I hope we stop and say thank you, but we're glad we don't have to do them. Well, it turns out when you talk to those people, the work is not the problem. The problem is the way they're managed, the work environment. Because so often they kind of feel infantilized, they feel disrespected. I mean, I think about this. Even a frontline worker today, they probably bought a car, right? They took a loan, but they bought a car. Maybe they even bought a house. And yet at work, that person finds himself kind of stifled in a straitjacket of petty rules. They can't requisition a $300 office chair without getting someone's permission. They see these 500 to 1 salary differentials between the top of the house and their own salary. And it's really hard to believe in that environment that you matter. They have very little freedom. They have very little financial upside. And so, the average first level, essential worker feels kind of more like a drone than they feel like somebody who really matters in their organization. Right. And we think, we think that's like indefensible ethically, but we also think it's indefensible economically. If you look at many of the companies we profile in our book, companies like the U.S. Steel company, Nucor, these are companies that have turned on the problem-solving skills of every employee, people on the front lines. You got so-called blue-collar employees making million-dollar investment decisions, experimenting all the time, driving the business forward with a big financial stake in the future of the business. And these people on the front line, they feel like owners. They do not feel like employees. And, there was a time, a couple hundred years ago when America was a republic of owners. And we had these. And then slowly we all kind of became hirelings and we kind of taken this for granted. So we really want to challenge that and say, even in a large company, you can create a culture and a structure in which every person feels critical, is respected, has a financial upside. And every company needs to be kind of a confederation of owners, whether it's a startup or not.
Now, in the beginning of the book, you talk about organizations having these organizational disabilities. Kind of talk about what those organizational disabilities are. And you also talk about the articles of impeachment for kind of getting rid of those bureaucracies. Kind of talk about all of that, if you don't mind, Gary.
Well, I've had the chance to be in and around a lot of organizations in my life. And I'm embarrassed that it took me so long to kind of put the picture together. But what I realized was, whatever the industry, whatever the country, once organizations reached a certain size, and it didn't have to be very big, maybe even a couple hundred employees, what you would see was that they were all afflicted by a common set of disabilities that were very similar, from business to business. They tended to be inertial. They found it very difficult to challenge their internal assumptions and get in front ahead of the curve. In fact, change when it came was often kind of late and in crisis. They tended to be quite incremental. It was hard for new ideas to get a foothold and get a hearing, and they weren't very good at break the rules innovation. And as we've looked at some of this data, they tended to be rather uninspiring. And so I started to ask, well, why, if you see something over and over again, this is not about one company, there's something deeper. So then I went back and said, well, what do all these organizations have in common? And what you realize is they're all built on a similar set of assumptions, on a similar structure where power trickles down, big leaders appoint little leaders, the folks at the top set strategy and direction. You got layers of managers who assign tasks and assess performance. Everybody's kind of competing tooth and claw for promotion. And you go, well, maybe the problem lies there. And when you really pull that apart, you say, yeah, that's the problem. We have organizations that are built on this bureaucratic model of, kind of the authoritarian power structures and a lot of rules. And that's a product of its time. That was invented about 150 years ago when the average employee was very poorly educated, when we were for the first time learning how do you bring employees together at scale, when information was very difficult to move and expensive to move. So you'd aggregate it up, you'd have people report to their boss and then report up. And that was really the only way to move information. It was a time when change was very gradual, and you, as an organization, you didn't have to be a kind of fleet-footed. And where we kind of started the conversation, it was also a time when scale mattered more than anything else. So none of those things are true anymore, and yet we still have those kind of stultifying organizations that were built to maximize conformance, to maximize efficiency at scale. And then you wake up in a world and say, no, we need organizations that are resilient, that are daring, that are hugely creative. And there's just about nothing in that old management model that helps us build those capabilities. So what the book is really aimed at is giving people some really practical ways of uninstalling bureaucracy and starting to overcome the disabilities, the conservatism, the inertia, and the timidity that comes with those kind of rule-driven organizations.
Quick follow-up, if I don't mind me asking, because you talked about how the workplace and the employees are becoming more knowledgeable about their prospects, stuff like that. And you talk about this in the book, and wanting to be more entrepreneurial and stuff like that. Is it the bureaucracy that's in place? Are they just thinking that like, well, we'll never be toppled. Nobody can ever like take us over. We'll never go out of business. Why they keep these institutions in place? Because I can't tell you, I mean, how many times have we heard, and Gary, you know this all the time, how many times have we heard where you run an idea up the chain and say it's stupid. They leave the company and they start a $16 billion idea and they come that competitor. So where's this, like, how do we change that mindset of those business leaders to kind of topple that bureaucracy?
Yeah, well, that's a very, very good point. It's curious to me, so often you hear leaders kind of bemoan the fact that they're not, good ideas in the organization. No, the problem is you're not listening to them. You haven't built an environment that brings them to the surface. And, there's a way you can test this in any organization now, but I use a simple set of questions that I love to go down to first line employees, whatever those are in the warehouses, the stores, tech support, whatever it is. And you ask them 3 questions. The first question is, have you been trained as a business innovator? Has your employer made any investment in your creative capital? Have they taught you how to see emerging trends or how to unearth these unmet customer needs? So have they helped you think like a creative business person? And the answer is like, no. Second question I ask them is, well, if you had an idea here, is it easy to get a little bit of funding, a few hundred, a few $1,000s, maybe 30, 50% of your time to go experiment with that idea? Is there some internal equivalent to Kickstarter where it's pretty easy to get a little funding? The answer is no, I wouldn't even know how to get any funding. And, probably means going to my boss. If it doesn't interest him or her right now, the idea died. The third question I ask is it clear to you that your manager, your boss, cares about innovation? Are they talking about it? Is it clear there's some measures around it? Are they measuring the number of new ideas that come up every month? How many of them get funded? How much of time is being invested in those things? And is it clear that your leader's compensation depends on the innovation performance of your unit? And again, people say, no, I don't really hear my leader talk much about that. So I have to go back to the CEO then, because every CEO will claim to be serious about innovation. So I have to go back to the CEO and say, listen, here's what we found out. We asked people, have they been trained to think creatively? No. Is it easy for them to get something started? No. Are leaders held accountable for building a climate of innovation? No. So okay, so when you told me you were serious about innovation, let me understand how you use the word serious, because this doesn't sound very serious to me. If you don't train for it, don't make it easy, don't hold people accountable. So now why, the question you're asking, Dominic, was a very interesting one. Everybody knows that. So why does that situation persist? And, that's, and I think that's where you come back to the fact that bureaucracy is a very, very deeply embedded social structure. You go back, for hundreds of years, aristocracy was the dominant way of organizing civil society.
Right.
You just expected to be a king or a queen, and they had absolute authority. For centuries and centuries and centuries, we had patriarchy, and men just had certain privileges that women didn't have, and we just, accepted that way. For most of human history, slavery was a fact. And in ancient Greece, 75% of the residents of Athens were slaves. And so for centuries, some of these incredibly regrettable social realities were there until somebody said, why? And this, and so I just think there are a lot of leaders who are kind of caught in that old paradigm. And here's the problem. If you've never trained and turned on employees to think in this way and give them the opportunity, then very little creativity is forthcoming. It's easy to assume, well, these people are kind of lunkheads. There's not much they can do. I'll tell you an experience I had,
Absolutely.
a huge experience I had in my career that helped me see around this, Dominic. This is probably 20 years ago, and I was training a large group of blue-collar, unionized employees in a Midwestern manufacturing company to think like business innovators. And I remember one woman, she'd spent her entire life probably working on the assembly line, and she had an idea for what ultimately became a multi-million-dollar new business. Mm-hmm. And we took over the interior space of a suburban shopping mall one weekend, and we asked all these blue-collar employees to take, they'd all built prototypes, little displays, demos of their ideas, and we put them inside this mall and said, ask your neighbors and everybody comes through to give you feedback. So I remember this woman standing there with her kids, so proud of what she'd done, getting all this positive feedback. And it hit me that probably no one before in her career had ever asked her really for a creative idea. And, that was just a prejudice. That was just like this belief that these people can't drive our business forward.
Right.
And I think it's a nonsense. So I think we've just been caught, like we have at other times in human history. We've been caught with this social system that misuses or fails to use a huge swath of human capability. One of the pioneers of the American Revolution, Thomas Paine, deep thinker, who was kind of the spur for both the American and French Revolution, he said, a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. And I think that's where we've ended up. It's like, this is the way we've always treated employees. This is the way we're organized. We have multiple levels. How could it be otherwise? And now, when we try to tell some of these stories in the book, there are some compelling examples of companies that have broken out of that old model. They're reaping incredible results. They have, their workers are incredibly creative and turned on. And yet a lot of companies are just stuck in that old model.
All right, Startup Nation. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We got to pay some bills. Once again, my name is Dominic Lawson, and you're listening to The Startup Life. Support for The Startup Life is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-belt grooming. Startup Nation, personal grooming is super important, not only from a hygiene standpoint, but also from a confidence one as well. And that is why you need to have a tight haircut and, well, a nice groomed undercarriage as well. And when doing that, you don't want to use the same razor, do you? That's just absurd. And this is why our friends at Manscaped have given you another option. Introducing the all-new Lawnmower 3.0 by Manscaped. This lightweight and waterproof razor features precision engineered blades for safe trimming in sensitive areas and a 7,000 RPM motor with quiet stroke technology. Ladies, Father's Day is just around the corner, and this will make a perfect gift for that guy on the go. Use code TheStartupLife in all caps for 20% off and free shipping on your brand new Lawnmower 3.0 at manscaped.com. We have a link there in the show notes for easy access if you listen to the replay on the podcast. And while you're there, be sure to check out all the other products from manscaped.com as well. So for proper manscaping without the fear of hurting anything, go with Manscaped. Trust me, your family of jewels will thank you. By Colony Spark. Startup Nation, with our economy in flux, there is a lot of mixed messaging out there. If there was ever a time to take control of the narrative and let your customers know that you're here to serve them, it's now. And that's why you have a friend in Colony Spark. Colony Spark is an omni-channel marketing agency that believes in the power of community to ignite your business. They have helped companies across many industries with lead generation, revenue growth, and more to put them on the path to success. My guy Bill Murphy and his team are very good at what they do. How do I know this? Because not many SEO companies have the stamp of approval of being partnered with Google. Yes, that Google. So I want you to go to www.colonyspark.com/startup to schedule a meeting today. In that meeting, you will review your current marketing activity, receive actionable advice on how to pivot and grow, and ask any marketing questions you may have on navigating over the next few months. Look, Startup Nation, I know things may seem uncertain right now, but if you are looking for a business partner that can help light the way, go with Colony Spark, where they firmly believe in business helping business. All right, Startup Nation, welcome back as we continue our conversation with today's guest here on The Startup Life. Thank you for sharing that. And once again, Startup Nation, that book is Humanocracy, Creating Organizations as Amazing as the People Inside Them. And that book, you can get that book today, Startup Nation. You have a link there in the show notes for easy access, for you can pick that up if you listen to the replay on the podcast. You know, Gary, I was actually on your Instagram page today, and I saw that you had a video of this automatic milking machine for like cows or whatever, right? And when I knew we were going to talk today, it made me think about one of those tools that bureaucracy kind of uses to keep people in line, which is robotics, or replacing your jobs with robotics and stuff like that. Kind of talk about why that's probably not the best way to kind of like spur innovation and spur a great culture within the organization.
Well, as you know, at the moment, there's an enormous fear about what automation, AI, robotics is going to do to employment, kind of automation anxiety. And a lot of people have been making very dire predictions that perhaps a third of the workforce gets replaced. I'm a lot more hopeful, and I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. First of all, the studies that I look at, one of them done by McKinsey and Company, the big consulting company,
right?
There are some capabilities today where machines are better than we are. They're better at pattern recognition. They're better at sorting. There's a certain thing, and that's fine. They're But if you look at the things that really drive innovation, creativity, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, lateral thinking, creative problem solving, machines are nowhere close to being as good as we are. In the end of the day, machines are very good at pattern recognition, pattern making. They're not very good at pattern breaking. And innovation always comes from when somebody says, let's do this in a different way. I think about Toyota. Toyota's employees submit over 1 million ideas, suggestions for improvement every year. And most of those are things that the employees have already tried and they're working, and now they're sharing them across the organization. Like, how many of those ideas are going to come out of AI or a robot that it's going to be able to think laterally about a fundamentally better or different way? I don't think it's going to happen. And so my sense is we have to be worried about the job displacing impact of automation only to the extent we continue to treat our employees as robots. Again, I talk about Nucor Steel in the book, and it's by far the most profitable, most innovative steel company in the United States. It has about twice the profit per employee as its rivals. It has a head office, a $20 billion company, a head office of only 100 individuals. The frontline people are extraordinarily creative. And it's also one of the most highly automated steel companies, because in that company, when frontline employees improve productivity, their pay goes up. And so everyone has an incentive to, hey, let's find the latest, greatest equipment. Let's go up. And so, they are using their employees to solve bleeding edge problems, not to take drudgery out of work through robots and AI. So I think the impact of AI is probably way exaggerated in terms of what it's going to do to employment. And to the extent it is a risk, we can mitigate the risk by actually following some of the principles we lay out in the book and teaching people how to think like business people, giving them more freedom to solve problems right where they are, disaggregating their organizations into relatively small business units and local P&L so every one of them feels like an owner, making sure we share the rewards of those productivity gains back to the frontline employees. You do that, and you'll have a company full of what I would call micropreneurs, and they will beat all comers, and they are not going to be worried about automation.
I hear that. I appreciate you sharing that. Micropreneurs. Let's add that to our vocabulary, Startup Nation. I want to ask you this, because like we mentioned earlier, you're a visiting professor at the London Business School. I want to ask you this, because you probably talk to a lot of MBA candidates and stuff like that. When you talk, when you're, teaching and stuff like that, and let's say they're about to get a job, What is some advice you would give them as they're getting ready to roll into a leadership position, kind of be part of that bureaucracy, if you will, a lot of times? What is something they should do in the first 90 days on the job to kind of help spur that creativity and spur that humanocracy that you talk about a lot?
Well, that's a super, super great question, Dominic. Thank you for asking that. I think, unfortunately, a lot of folks who go to business school, whether that's undergraduate or MBA program, the kind of implicit value proposition, if you pay your tuition dollars, we're going to give you fast track up the hierarchy.
Right.
And I think as we move forward, our organizations are going to become less and less hierarchical. They're going to be way fewer levels of management. And the game of promotion is going to change. You think about the generation that's going to work right now. This is the first generation in human history whose primary social reference point is in a hierarchy. Right? When I was a kid, whether I looked at business, at government, at education, at religion, wherever you looked, it was organized like, multiple levels. Now you look at the web where, if I have followers on Twitter or wherever it is, it's not because somebody appointed me a vice president. It's because people wanted me to follow. A power trickles up, doesn't trickle down. And the moment I stop adding value, my followers are going to drift somewhere else. And so I tell the young people I talk to is that's the way it's going to be at work. People are going to ask, are you worth following? No one is going to compel anybody to follow you. If you're not adding value, I'll give you an example. One of the other companies I talk about in the book is Haier. It's the largest home appliance maker in the world, based in Qingdao, China. They now own GE Appliance North America. So they've divided an 80,000 person company up into 4,000 micro enterprises. And each year in these little teams, the team itself elects their leader for the year. They're all pursuing very ambitious goals. Everyone has a big financial upside. If they hit these goals, they can multiply their base salary several times over. So the team gets to choose their leader. And they're not looking for, somebody's going to be nice. They're looking for somebody who's going to get them to that next level. And interestingly, if they miss their performance target for 3 months in a row, it triggers an automatic leadership re-election, and they're going to find somebody else. And so in that kind of organization, leaders are accountable to the led, not the other way around. So to your point about what's the specific advice I give, a couple things. One very specific. I'll start there and something more general. I think if you're a young person or anybody in an organization and you want to build your leadership capital, here's how to approach it. The first time you meet somebody new on your team, maybe a new employee, or you come into an organization, you're getting to know people, the very first conversation you have with that person should be all about them. And not about the business, not about their role. You need to start by saying, what's your story? Where did you come from? What are you trying to achieve in life? What are the challenges you face personally with family and other things? Who are you and where do you want to go? You have to connect to that individual as a human being, not as an employee. The second conversation I talk a little bit about me, but I wouldn't talk about, I'm your new boss or here are my goals for the business. I would talk about my vulnerabilities, my mistakes, what I've screwed up, my experiences, because I got to be human to them as well. Just another person on this planet trying to figure it out and one day at a time. The third conversation I have with them would be about the business, but I again start with them and I'd say what can I do to help you succeed here? What's standing in your way? What makes no sense to you? What do you need out of me so you can excel? So if that's the way you approach and build your relationships with the people around you at work, they are going to follow you anywhere, right? And of course, this has to be genuine. It has to come out of your heart. But that's how you build deep, meaningful community in an organization and real relationships. The other thing I would say to somebody, going into a company is never assume you're helpless to change the organization around you. I meet so many young people who just assume, and sometimes older people who've been in an organization for years, who just assume that if you're not the CFO or the head of HR or something else, you really can't do anything significant. And yet, when I look at the world around us, I see that it is activists who change things. It's not the people in power. And so, my advice is if you want to change something in your organization, never ask for permission. Don't go up. Go sideways. Find 3, 5, 10 of your colleagues, of your peers. See if you can talk them into showing up on a Saturday morning and helping you think about this problem. Build a prototype. Try something. Write a white paper. Mock something up. and then actually run a little experiment right where you are. Don't blow anything up. Don't take a legal risk. Don't degrade the customer experience, but try something right where you are. And once you have a success, now go talk to your boss, your manager, and tell them what you need to keep going. And so, we need people who do not think about themselves as employees, but who think about themselves as activists, who have the courage to take on new problems, who have the compassion that will attract others to work with them on this, who are contrarian thinkers. And when you start to cultivate those things in yourself, you find out that what you can accomplish doesn't correlate at all with your title or your position in an organization. So for me, build really high fidelity, high quality relationships with the people around you out of humility. Search for genuine connection. Be a servant to everyone. And never assume you're helpless.
It just goes back to show, and I'm glad you said all of that. It just goes back to show, Startup Nation, everybody in the organization has value. When you were talking, Gary, it made me think about the gentleman at Frito-Lay who started as a janitor and came up with the idea of the Flamin' Hot Cheetos, and now he's like vice president at PepsiCo. And so it just goes to show that everybody has value. Everybody has ideas that can definitely be worth multi-million dollars for an organization or for yourself if you want to dive out into entrepreneurship. So Gary, I thank you for sharing all of that for sure.
My pleasure.
No worries. So we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up with Gary Hamel. Once again, he is the author of Humanocracy, Creating Organizations as Amazing as the People Inside Them. In Startup Nation, that book is available today for you to pick up. We have a link there in the show notes for easy access. Gary, I was telling you earlier that I was on your Instagram page and I saw a picture of your father reading your book. Kind of talk about him a little bit.
Well, I owe my dad a lot. He was also a university professor, but also an entrepreneur. He built a very successful business.
Gotcha.
And so, I think that's where my passion, both for business and maybe intellectual curiosity, were born. And he was a World War II vet in Britain during the Blitz, and thankfully is just about to have his 101st birthday and going strong. So, I think. We whatever we get in life, we have to pay it forward, and this book is maybe one small way of paying it forward for me.
I hear that. Appreciate you sharing that. And before I let you go, I'm actually going to turn the microphone over to you for a little bit, because there's somebody out there in Startup Nation, with everything going on, they're feeling a little stuck, a little afraid, a little bit to kind of pitch that idea sideways. Give them some words of encouragement to tell them to keep moving forward, if you would, Gary.
We do live in very tough times. I mean, let's make no mistake about that. We are, and it's not obviously just COVID. We're in a world where we're wrestling with racial injustice. We're wrestling with climate change, with income inequality. So there are a lot of things but we also live at a time of extraordinary opportunity. If you think about where we're going to go with 5G and how that's going to open up so many new opportunities, synthetic biology, the robotics, the AI, all of these things are opening up, new horizons. It's never been a better time to build a business and be an entrepreneur, I think. And never before has it been so easy. And that doesn't mean you don't face all kinds of challenges, but every time I go onto YouTube, for example, I look at this incredible expression of human creativity and ingenuity. I think last count like 31 million YouTube channels. And 20 years ago, none of those people would have had a voice. There would have been no way to, the tools of creativity, the video editing and so on, they were like expensive or out of reach. You had gatekeepers who were controlling access to an audience. And now it's just like you and your creative capacity and your imagination. So, I think we live in an extraordinary time for entrepreneurship and for startups. And I think that anybody who's going down that course, I hope you'll persevere through all the difficulties. I hope as your organization grows, you'll be careful to inoculate it against that creeping bureaucracy, which can kind of rob the work environment of joy and passion and so on. But learn something new every day. Spend a lot of time thinking about what are those unmet needs of customers, what are the frustrations we have in our lives that nobody's bothered to sort out for us yet. Think about the dogma, the orthodoxies that you see all around you in industry, the things that people just take for granted and haven't been willing to challenge, and then challenge them and build something great. Because, never more a challenging time, but never a world that's been filled with as much opportunity as we have right now.
I hear that. Thank you so much for sharing that. We always talk about there's opportunities in the chaos. Once again, we want to say thank you to Gary Hamel for coming on The Startup Life. Thank you so much, Gary. We really appreciate that, you coming on the show. And as always, Startup Nation, if you have an idea, be about that life, The Startup Life.
If you want to let us know what you think about our show, have an idea for a show topic, or would like to advertise on our show, send us a message on the Startup Life Podcast Facebook page. And while you are there, like and follow our page as well. It's a great way for us to engage with you, Startup Nation, and really grow our community. The link is there in the show notes. Subscribe to the show as it can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or even on your Facebook timeline or any other platform you like to get your podcast. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you find our content valuable, please give us a 5-star rating, as it will help us climb the charts and help more people find our show. You can also listen to the show on the Startup Life Podcast new website. There you will find the all-new startup blog where I write on many topics that are interesting and helpful to you on your path to entrepreneurship. And hey, if you have an idea, be about that life, the startup life.